entire life. But just for your information, it may be important for you to know that my first fascination with system science was when I studied medicine. But I didn't finish medicine because I couldn't see myself working in hospital for the rest of my life. And so the other side of me is that I am a master carpenter. So that's what I did when I stopped studying medicine. Had a carpentry apprenticeship and became a master carpenter and ran a cooperative and built production lines. I'm saying this because I do, despite all of my theory, I do have a very practical, let's say, a practical way of doing things. So anything that is in theory also for me needs to relate to practice. And the third thing is that I studied psychology, organizational psychology and political science. So I was always interested in the connection between the individual and the larger issues. And of course, Club of Rome, and who of you knows the Club of Rome? Wow, this is amazing. So you must have to do something with environmental science. Because most people your age don't know the Club of Rome anymore. Okay, so I don't have to say anything about the Club of Rome. I'm basing my lecture on the book that you can also have a look at. Maybe you can give it around if you don't mind. And I'll leave it here for the library. So you probably have electronic access, but it would be, sometimes it's good to also look at it. And I'm just saying this because if you scroll down, the lowest article is free on the internet. I think the one above is also free on the internet. So if you want to have any access to this is also easy. And it might be interesting because it's a quite elaborate theory that I developed, but sometimes you need to put this into business language, and the lower blog article is kind of putting this into business language, not much referring to the theory. What it is about today is that I would like to start with, you all know we have the year 2020, but the year 2020, despite the fact that we're all sitting here in this wonderful building, we actually must say we are in a planetary emergency. And I don't think that I have really grasped it, apart from the fact that my mind has grasped it, and probably it's the same for you if you're interested in environment. But we are in a situation where you all know this, the trajectories of the Anthropocene, we can't continue like this. And I think we quite don't really know what it means to not continue. Yeah, so, and I don't have to show this. Who has been joining Fridays for Future? Anybody of you? Yeah, at least a few. Who has been joining Extinction Rebellion? Yeah, okay. So something's happening, the something is serious. And something can also be a bit of fun, but it's really about the big issues. And I don't want to talk about Davos now, the World Economic Forum. I was just asked to give a comment on that. And I think it shouldn't have taken place, and the resources should have been put to other use. So I don't think we need a World Economic Forum. We need to put the money to other activities. But at least at the end of last year, the European Parliament has declared climate and environmental emergency. And that's a lot. But my talk today is about what does that mean? How do we go about it? And I don't know how familiar you are with the effect that the measurement of GDP has on our societies, but I just kind of suppose you are. It's pretty clear that the growth paradigm can't continue. But interesting enough, some of you may know this picture, many measurements in the world that you can make, funny enough, follow the growth paradigm. But that's not good news. The news is on that this really is putting us into danger. So 50 years ago, the Club of Rome published a very famous report, or it became famous, The Limits to Growth. And became famous because people were also annoyed about a new insight, and the new insight is we can't just go with industrial, I also call it the neoliberal economy paradigm. We need to look at, to reconcile our relationship with nature. But I would like to mention that as much as that report shocked inspired people, you know, it shocked a lot of industry people, and there was a lot of publicity against the report. It inspired a lot of other people. As much as that was the case in 1978, the issue is that if you look back into science, then you can find writings of, for example, Ernst Haeckel or Alexander von Humboldt, and these are just happen to be Germans, could be other people, or Marsh on Man and Nature. So in already 1804, 1820, 1850, scientists and renowned scientists were saying there's a relationship between the destruction of nature, climate change, and slavery. It's quite interesting. So I think we need to not only go back 50 years, we need to maybe bring the knowledge of 200 or 250 years together. So interesting enough, there are, of course, now, there is a lot going on. It's not just Fridays for Future, but Fridays for Future has managed to put things on the agenda that probably are on the agenda, but not as noticed, you know, by politicians or by everybody. What also is on the agenda since 2015 are the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm putting this as an example of an attempt to stewardship, because it is a kind of global guidance through a consensus building and collective action process. And what is quite interesting is that the global goals have been developed in a very elaborate and long participatory process with lots and lots and lots of people. And today they seem to be as if they were just there. You know, so people see the results and people see the colorful pictures, and nobody has a clue about the 169 targets that are behind there. And some of the scientists, including some colleagues of the Club of Rome, say this can't be implemented because there are so many contradicting targets that this is impossible. But I love these Sustainable Development Goals, not for the fact that they might be contradicting, not for the fact that they might not match with the real climate action that we need to do, but I love them because they show that the consensus building process on a global level is possible. And I also love them because they create identification. So I know a lot of people. There's one municipality in the Netherlands, the smallest municipality. They have the global goals as part of their strategy. So they have global goals ambassadors, and everybody identifies with that. So the fact that they are freely accessible, you know, these pictures and logos, etc., is an amazing step that people can identify with that globally. But apart from that, this is also a kind of half voluntary, half obligatory administrative process. So don't ever try to submit any project proposal to your government these days or to funders without saying which global goals you're going to address with the project. So it has actually been integrated in administrative processes. What is also quite an interesting approach to a like stewarding, a different kind of behavior, is the guidance through appropriate measurements. We all know, or I assume that you know, that GDP is still the dominant measurements. That's the way we tick, but it is not really helpful if we look into the future. This is an initiative that is a science initiative, saying we as scientists, we can define targets around the planetary boundaries and then help companies and help cities to develop their own strategies and targets around these planetary boundary targets. You know, to keep planetary boundary are familiar? Okay, so because I'm assuming that I'm in an environment where planetary boundaries are familiar. Okay, but why I'm saying this, it's quite interesting because it is not really, as you can see, it says a future-proofing growth. It's not really contradicting the growth paradigm. So it's almost a bit of a compromise to say, yes, we can continue, but we need to continue in a way so that we keep the planetary boundaries. I'm pretty doubtful that this is going to work. And but it's an interesting initiative. The other initiative that's also quite interesting in terms of stewardship is a law approach. I don't know, have you ever heard about polyhedons? Okay, some may, some not. Polly Higgins unfortunately passed away. She died of cancer at the beginning of 2019. I put her picture because a lot about the stewardship is also about human agency. It's about people having a vision and going forward. And Polly Higgins was really promoting, and her team and other people are still promoting this, that the only way things will change in terms of behavior if we put rights to nature and if we make ecocide a crime against humanity. And then it's not only against humanity, it's against the planet. So these are different ways of approaches to stewardship. And quite interesting, is that picture familiar to you? Do you know? Okay, yeah, fine. So it's an article by Stefan that has, I think, gone around quite a lot. What is interesting in terms of what we want to talk about here is that indeed the term stewardship now shows up in literature. It hasn't been doing so for a number of years, but slowly it's growing. And we need to consider that, and that is also a bit of a contradiction in the article, that stewarding is different from steering. But if you're pretty much familiar with complex systems, then you probably also know complex systems can't be steered. They cannot really be managed. They definitely cannot be controlled. So steering is a different way of approaching things. It is almost like having something entrusted to me that I take care of. And so that is a different way of dealing with things. So that is a different way of approaching the caretaking task that is so important for our future. The colleagues from the WWF and the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and the Club of Rome have put together a planetary emergency plan. And so it's possible to put the things that we really want to do and that really we have to put into a plan. One can discuss about the content of the plan, and I'm sure people will do that. But what is important is to remind us that it is about a fundamental turnaround of the way we relate to nature, to technology. But interesting enough, I'm saying this and emphasizing this also to each other. And that's why I go back to Alexander von Humboldt, who says the relationship between people, the relationship to nature, and climate are intrinsically linked. So it's not something out there, it is connected to us, to in here, to our thinking. So if you look, I can't go to the entire plan. This is openly available on the internet. But what I thought is maybe interesting is that there are many plans coming up. I've just read on my way here on my iPhone that there is a German Zero plan that has been developed also by lots of people. So more and more plans are coming up of what to do, you know. And here it is focusing on transforming energy systems, shifting to a circular economy, that might be very interesting for you, and about a just and equitable society. So what has become clear over the last couple of years probably is that one needs an interconnected approach. So one strategy, one approach, one silo approach is not going to work for the future. So that at least is a big step forward. But what does such an action plan require, and what is the role of science? And I would like to focus a little bit on this role of science because there are many questions to ask, I think, that probably haven't been asked in the past. So my first proposition is the new role of science is to reconnect and integrate what belongs together. Because we live in a world where things are terribly fragmented. And I don't know how much, if you are you all in kind of environmental science, you know, kind of the broad thing? Okay, so how much psychology is in your study? Is that a little or is it zero? Okay, yeah, so. Okay, so So I've recently read an article written by a lady from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Research about what are the social tipping points for kind of a better behavior, kind of for rescuing us from the planetary emergency. It was a bit of a mix of technical and social tipping points, and it is an interesting architecture, but I freaked because I thought, guys, if you're so much into natural science and into climate research, could you please go to the people who know about social change? Because it was like, you haven't read, all the books and all the articles, that have been published about social change. But I promise you, the people who publish articles on social change never care about climate change. So it's like, that's not entirely true, but it is, we were still stuck in quite a lot of siloed thinking. So I do think we need to bring things together that look as if they don't belong together, and what it also means we need to re-enchant the world, because we have built a world in the last 220, I would say, years, where things are out there and feelings don't belong in science. Intuition doesn't belong in science. We are, I think, here in the Einstein thing. Are we? Yes? Einstein wouldn't be Einstein without intuition, without insights that came to him, that he not just logically deducted, but insights that came to him. So I do think we need to look at what would it mean to actually go over the boundaries that are so fixed in science and also in society, and look at what would it mean to re-enchant the world. And I would like to hint you to somebody who I find really fascinating. It's Grace Lee Boggs. Grace Lee Boggs passed away in 2015 at the age of 100. And when she was 95, she wrote a book about the future. And I think this is something to admire. And what she says is the new paradigm we must establish is about creating systems that bring out the best in each of us. We are, so far, not really doing this. I think we're trying a bit with circular economy approaches, we're trying a bit with many other things, but we are not to our humanity. And that is something that science needs to ask and not exclude from what we do. So it is about co-creating futures and really doing this together. It's about connecting people. It's about innovating pathways. It's about something that sounds strange for scientists, but it's about appreciating dignity in science, but also in not only what we research, but also how we research. It's about collective sense-making rather than individual sense-making, and it's understanding the web of life. And I found it quite interesting. I recently had a short lecture at a German university, a very reputable university, and that was for PhD students that came from all over the world and came together for a seminar, also on the topic of kind of research and transformations. And in the beginning, I asked them, so in what way is your PhD contributing to sustainability transformations? So they had little buzz groups, like we're talking, and then at the end, when they reflected, said, but we're not really doing change. We're just observing facts. That's what we do. And then I thought, when I went home, I thought, how can PhD students in the year 2020 not make a decisive contribution to transformation? They said, we just objectively observe. So, okay, so that is a challenge. I do think we need to go back to issues like meaning, and we need to connect knowledge and meaning. And I think there's a lot to explore about the different ways of knowledge creation, and we may have limited our mind. I'm generalizing, but to say knowledge creation takes place in a certain way, particularly if it's about science and academic research and academic studies. That is knowledge creation. But if you look over the world, and look at the challenges of climate change, we might need to look at knowledge creation that is totally and utterly different from how we approach it today. Anybody from China here? Okay, so I don't know if I say something totally and utterly wrong, but what I found fascinating about, if you look back into Chinese history and China's philosophy, there is something that I probably translated the wrong way, but as a metaphor, the question in Chinese, particularly in I Ching, how you call it, the question that is being asked is what wants to happen together. And that's, if we took this into our knowledge creation, it's pretty much a different approach from how Western science approaches knowledge creation. Just asking the question, not what are the factors that are contributing to X, Y, Z, what wants to happen together? And I'm just kind of looking at making that kind of different view, available to more and more people. So the second proposition is that I think that's directly building on this sentence, is science needs to understand and model the pattern approach of life's support system. Now, does it come across to you as esoteric? I wouldn't be surprised. But I think it isn't. I don't know if you're familiar with Gregory Bateson, but there are lots and lots of scientists around that are kind of working in a different pocket, they're working in a different silo, but they are looking at patterns. And they say that if you look at the origins of life, and if you look at how life support systems are constituted, and those of you who research or try to understand ecosystems, let's just kind of stay with the forest, then the question, what is happening together? Maybe we kick out what wants to happen together, but what is happening together is an approach that one needs to take, otherwise one cannot understand things. But if you go a little bit further, then I would like to alert you to start beginning to see the world in patterns, because it is the patterns that we need to understand in order to know what are the patterns that need to be operating in the future. And how can we, as scientists, model these future patterns that are more alive, that are more regenerative, that are more circular. And that is an approach, an important way. So the question is, what is the pattern behind the obvious dysfunctionality of our world as we see it in the left corner, that is not going to take us in the future, and what are the patterns at work in regenerative alive systems? And some of it we know, particularly if you're in ecology or environmental science, some of it we know, but how can we learn from these patterns about the way we also organize the transformations into the future? I would like to introduce you to an interesting, anybody knows Christopher Alexander? Okay, I thought so. Some people nowadays know, and these are interesting enough, mainly IT people. In IT, Christopher Alexander is known, although he's not an IT specialist, he's an architect. And why he's so interesting is, number one, he's not a mainstream architect. He was really fighting a lot, particularly when he was working at the university as a professor, against the mainstream architecture, because he says we need to look at architecture as a space that is creating life or diminishing life. And now, each of you may say, yeah, I know places, where I really feel like happy. Or I might walk into a building and that building is giving me like a feeling of awe, but a feeling of harmony. But he says, we tend to, kind of in modern science, we tend to say, this is just a subjective feeling. And Christopher Alexander said, no, there is a logic to it. And there is a need for us to understand the patterns that are behind. So he says all systems in the world gain their life, and life is the crucial part that we need to understand when we want to go into the future, because our planet is alive and we need to learn to support aliveness and not what we do at the moment, which is rather the opposite. All systems in the world gain their life from cooperation and interaction of the living centers they contain. Now, people are living centers, but maybe spaces like corners and light and color are also living centers. And he says all these centers appear in space and they animate the space. So this is mind-boggling. If you read Christopher Alexander, I really, really recommend that. It's mind-boggling because he explains that even objects are alive. They're not alive in the sense of us breathing, but they are alive in the sense that they get into a relationship with other objects, and the fact that they do that creates something in the middle. And that is a totally different way of viewing reality. So that brings me to the third proposition, that I say science needs to become, or needs to take part in becoming collective stewards of transformations. And the way to do that is to learn to understand and recognize patterns that create aliveness in ecological systems, in economic systems, in social systems, within people, between people, etc. And that is, honestly, we are at the beginning of that. The ecology is probably far ahead of everybody else, and a little bit psychology maybe also, but in terms of aliveness in economic systems, what does that mean? That's extremely important. So it is for that extremely important that we look at scientists who have been dealing with the process of life. And I don't know if you, for example, I'm just kind of, this is not a test, but do you know Joanna Macy? Do you know Umberto Maturana? Do you know David Bohm? Okay, I'm not continuing, but I'm just going through. Yeah, because it is extremely important. Joanna Macy is a system scientist with a strong research focus on Buddhism, but not on Buddhism as a religion, but as a system. And Elizabeth Saturas is together with James Lovelock. James Lovelock Gaia theory probably is known. Elizabeth Saturas has written the book Earth Dance about the kind of the mutual consistency of smaller and larger systems in biology. And Stuart Kaufman is a system scientist, very much promoting the co-creation in the universe. Christopher Alexander, I mentioned. David Bohm is a quantum physicist who turned into a dialogue expert because he said dialogue is the way we actually live quantum physics. And he has been writing a lot about the implicate and the explicate order. Now, I don't know if you're sitting on your seat, but what he's basically saying is that everything that is in the world is already in the world in consciousness before it comes into the world. And I think this is getting esoteric. It's not. There is a huge research area out there on consciousness development that I think is urgently needed, because we wouldn't have Fridays for Future if there wouldn't be a shift in global collective consciousness. And we need to promote this, and we need to know this. And do you know Andreas Weber? You must know him. If not, get the biology of wonder. Andreas Weber is a German semiobiologist, and he now says, and still kind of sit in the seats, he says life is intentional. Anything in life, anything that is alive, wants to be more alive. And we need to understand that that sentient is an extremely important drive that we need to nurture. So the issue about our feeling of aliveness, our enlivenment, our inspiration, when we fall in love, is intrinsically connected to the biology of what we would call things. This is a fascinating book. So I'm just kind of putting this out as an encouragement to say, if you look at environmental science, if you look at ecology, if you look at circular economy, get out there and go on a discovery route. There is so much knowledge out that actually needs to be integrated into how we do things. So, but science loves definitions. So, systems aliveness, in my definition, is the capability of a system, and that may sound quite similar to what you're working on, as no matter small or large, to develop a sufficient degree of vitality and resilience. Vitality is not so much used in kind of environmental science. Resilience, I think you're all pretty familiar with, as well as the ability to maintain and renew these in collaboration and interaction with other systems. And what is needed for vitality and resilience is patterns of aliveness. So it is the resilience of the forest is composed of lots of patterns of aliveness. And you all know that an ecological resilience rests on diversity. So the more alive, diverse animal, plants, whatever, the more resilience the forest is. Systems aliveness can be recognized as a quality, and now this goes back to Christopher Alexander, because he says we can sense this, and now you can say this is not scientific. And I say we need to go there. We need to learn and to also acknowledge that we can probably be able in future to also measure the quality of that. So the issue is if that is recognizable, what systems aliveness is, and for yourself you may be able to recognize that. You know, if you're with a good friend and you can really chat for an entire evening, that is aliveness. And what's happening there? And I just encourage you to not see this as something so separate, you know, from what you do in your science or in your studies. So the issue is, once it is recognized and once one accepts that there might be a quality around systems aliveness, one can learn to steward systems aliveness. And I would like to take you to far away. I would like to take you, because that sounds so theoretic, I would like to take you far away to southern Tunisia. This is an area where there is a continuous drought because of climate change. And there are lots of farmers who don't have enough water to water their agricultural plots. And it is a socially, let's say, there are lots of social tensions, because it is an area where there was a lot of IS recruitment, you know, particularly of young people. And there is let's say, Tunisia after the revolution, a government that hasn't quite 100% adjusted to doing things in a different way. So let me say, rather bureaucratic. And as usual, as in many other countries too, the environmental ministry, the provincial ministry doesn't really work together with the agricultural ministry, and doesn't really work together with the social ministry, and you know how it is, all in silos. And so the task was to develop a water forum for integrated water resource management. Sounds familiar to you, yeah? Is it probably a task that many people think it's possible? Now, the difficulty in this area was that the government didn't dare to go into the countryside and talk to the farmers, because they were afraid that they would be shot at. And the farmers didn't indeed talk to the government, because they thought the government is totally useless. And they got their water from illegal wells, and sometimes they also put it all into the water pipe. And so basically the farmers called the government useless, and the government called the farmers criminals. So now getting into this situation, and you see this picture. This picture is half interested, half skeptical. Huh? So the people. So in terms of quality of aliveness, so okay. So what do they want from us? You know, why do you talk about a water forum? And are we going to participate in this? And we don't know. And there may be. And so that was the level. It took 9 months of listening to the farmers. Simply listening. With the permission of the government. So that was absolutely crucial. With the permission of the government. To really understand what the issues are and to understand what the level of organization was, because these farmers needed a voice, kind of without them being really properly represented in a water forum, you wouldn't have been able to move forward. And the interesting thing was that the farmers said, yeah, we do have water committees, but they don't work. Yeah, they said, can you re-enliven your water committees? And they said, no. They got together in different settings, and they finally created a representative system. And in that listening, we heard a lot of complaints about the government that I don't need to repeat. Basically useless. So, but only through talking with each other, they realized that actually they had also difficulties with each other, kind of competing for water instead of collaborating for water. And they also said, we're not going to get anywhere without the government. So it was the farmers who finally suggested, can we develop a water charter? And if we do this together as farmers, wouldn't it even be better if we do this together with the government officials? And so the result was that, and you can see this is slightly more enlivened, the pictures. So suddenly people got together, they had plans, they came up with ideas. The result was a water charter, the result was 6 working groups on different issues around water, in terms of regenerative agriculture. It was about kind of saving water, it's about sharing water, there were different working groups. And finally, and that's the lower picture, people met in a big room. That was actually the pre-meeting, that was with 80 people. And then about 1.5 years later, there was a meeting with 800 people. And that meeting was so extremely emotional. And it was also factual, because they had worked in a lot of working groups and they had made commitments how to go about water together in the future. But it was so emotional that people really cried, because they said it's the first time ever that we've come together and that we worked on that. This is increasing systems aliveness. So it means that the aliveness that needs to be in the way people deal with water needs to be reflected in the way people talk and work with each other. And that cannot be disconnected. Okay, this is just a kind of we had somebody who drew the picture. So basically it says that we started with the farmers, we started with different government institutions, and we started with the national government, and all these processes needed to be integrated and needed to be transparent. Everybody knew, that there would be processes on other levels, and then finally everything came together. So this is about stewarding something that you cannot control, that you cannot steer. You may get the funding for a water forum, but getting it going means you need to really walk with the people and not against them. So my next proposition is, therefore, that science, as much as politicians and activists need to become transformation literate. And what does it mean to be transformation literate? And I would just like to focus a little bit on one of the aspects in the planetary and mercury plan that says, develop national and cross-national roadmaps for all countries towards regenerative land use and circular economies. Sounds easy. But it is the major issue. Nobody has a clue how to do this. And I can just kind of offer my experience, and my experience has led to understanding that in transformation you need to understand what enlivens human agency, and look at the people in Tunisia, the farmers and the governments. You need to understand the functionality and the dysfunctionality of systems patterns. We are very good in defining the dysfunctionality of the systems patterns, but the functionality, particularly when it comes to human beings, psychology is absent. The psychology only deals with the, with therapy. No, I'm joking. This is exaggerated. But the relationality, it's slowly coming. There are people who look at transformation know more about dysfunctional patterns than about functional patterns. So this is a new, completely new area of science where I think we are at the beginning. And we need, and that is so important, we need to understand what makes processes transformative. So what I've developed, that is in the Green Book, what I've developed is a stewardship architecture that now might be a little bit mind-boggling for you, because suddenly I've been daring to integrate the individual level, the process level, the systems level, and the level of collaboration. This comes partly from science, and it comes partly from the practice of many, many projects like the Tunisia project. We've been working particularly also on the international level, you know, with global coffee value chain, global cocoa value chain, global textile value chain, global cashew value chain, etc. So it's not only the local examples, but it's the extraction of what works. And it is about focusing on human interaction systems. It is looking at how can we learn to design things in a different way. And it is also a diagnose tool if you think about how can you gauge the quality of aliveness in a particular system. I see you taking a picture, that's totally okay, but I'm sure that you're going to get the PowerPoint in one way or another. Yeah? So if not, I promise. Okay, and it's a guiding structure for large systems change. So what needs to happen if we want to become transformation literate? And transformation literacy means that we can look at the human agency, we can look at the system, and we can look at the process at the same time. And we know how to organize processes that enliven human systems and human interaction systems, and also enliven the relationship between people and nature. And the issue is, like, if you look at the center, you see a flower. Somebody, I think he was a practitioner or a scientist, you know, said, Petra, why is there this funny flower in the middle? And there's a reason. The reason is that is the image for aliveness. It's the image for systems aliveness. And that's why the flower is in the middle. There are other reasons that may become too esoteric, so I'm not going to mention them here. but it stands for the aliveness. So the issue is the core of the future is human agency, and that's why in the core circle are these figures that look at future possibilities, engagement, innovation, humanity, collective intelligence, and wholeness. They stand for human competencies that we need to invigorate, and they also stand for the way we need to design change processes. And that's where my passion lies, to really bring together the people who are about facts and figures and the things that need to be changing, and the knowledge about how to get people into change processes that are really feel enlivened and that really want to make a difference. So the issue is here, how do we tap into people's desire to build a better future together? It is the question that we need to ask, how can we engage people who need to become part of the future? And how do we foster people's desire to invent new pathways? How can we touch people's hearts if we forget that they won't be with us? And create space for reflection and action. There's normally, I don't know about your projects, but normally no time for reflection. And how can we leverage diverse perspectives and not be afraid of diversity? I think no species is so afraid of diversity as human beings. So we need to kind of turn this around. And how can we inspire people's desire to contribute to something larger? At the moment, there is the opportunity. So what we also need to learn is more than just looking at human agency as if human agency was individual agency. We need to understand what constitutes collaboration ecosystems. So it's about looking at how I grow. If I want, for example, to go about, let's say, a circular economy roadmap for the Netherlands, what about that? So who's initiating this, and who needs to be part of it, and who needs to be supporting this in a broader container? Who needs to be part of the collaboration system, and who is in the stakeholder system relevant to really go through and be able to look at all the different levels. And that is complex. Change is complex. And nature is complex, and we better learn, how to deal with that complexity. But there are also systematic ways of doing that. And what has turned out is really, really interesting is that that's the second level. The first level is human competencies and design principles, and the second level is collaboration catalysts. When is the quality of the collaboration so that it will deliver results? And that is something that is really so important to learn. So how do we ensure all actors co-own the strategy? If I have mapped out the strategy and others should implement it, then it's not going to work. So how do we cultivate a network of complementary collective action? At the moment, if you look at, even in the circular economy, although there's the World Circular Economy Forum in Finland, bringing everybody together, but if you look at the circular economy and the regenerative economy and the blue economy and the well-being economy, and then there are lots and lots of actors in competition instead of collaboration. So how do we build on existing innovative approaches and foster new approaches? I've come across so many projects that reinvented the wheel, although there were people who already had a good idea. So I said, build on it and create the space for more. How do we continuously attend to the value creation for all and not say, there will be some losers? Right? So I know quite a lot of people in the European Communion, and they tend to say this. They tend to say, there will always be losers. I think there shouldn't. And looking at things like that is, for me, not the right way to do. And how do we establish high-quality dialogue structures that enhance implementation? The Tunisia example was one way. It was like 9 months of listening and getting people together in structured dialogues. And how do we contribute to and act in relation to a larger transformation system? So it means that if everybody wants energy transition and we all kind of try to get our little disconnected islands of success together, then it's not going to work. But if all the disconnected islands of success feel they're part of something bigger, and we can learn from each other, we can relate to a bigger system, and the system could be energy transition, or the system could be a circular roadmap, or a circular economy roadmap, or whatever. So this is just an example how this can be translated in something that looks quite technical, and yet it is true. If it's going down to the details, this is a roadmap for a multi-stakeholder partnership, a collaboration ecosystem on organic agriculture in Mongolia. And so you can see that you need to work on different levels. You need to level ADRA stands for the NGO that is initiating this. So you need to work on the provincial level and at the national level, and you even need to work on the international level in order to make that work. And on each of these levels, you need to create collaboration ecosystems that can deliver the change, and then the whole thing becomes a collaboration ecosystem that can deliver change. And this is another example where it's about equitable and sustainable tuna supply chain. This is a WWF project. And where, again, you have now here different areas, different local areas that need to actually learn from each other, the two lower bars, and then the national level that need to come together. You don't need to go into the detail, but you see, becoming transformation literate means you need to be able to build proper processes and need to know when you bring which people in which conversation together. And that is really an art, and it is at the same time a science. So if we transfer this to the large systems change, then I would say changing the energy system in a country, or building a circular economy roadmap is a large system change, because you have to involve so many different actors, and you have to also look at different strategies that look disconnected, but they actually need to be connected. So in terms of that, you need to actually look at the transformation enablers. So you need to look at the narratives, because people tend to forget it. It's a little bit of a fashionable word these days. We need to, like the narratives. But what does it really mean, and how can we create for a large systems change like circular economy roadmap a narrative that inspires companies and entrepreneurs and consumers and politicians at the same time? Finland has worked on that, and it wasn't too bad with the narrative. We're going to be the pioneering country in the world for a circular economy approach. So that was for the first year enough, to get actors into participating. But it may not be enough for the long run, because the consumers in Finland may not be so interested. So you really have to look at the narrative for all. How do we create network structures and process flows that foster circular and regenerative practice? Again, interesting example from the Finland roadmap is that they deliberately had a kind of committee composed of different stakeholders working on it together, and they created learning networks between policy approaches, investment approaches, technical approaches, and specific innovations. So, and that means how do we incentivize and leverage innovation for circular economy or regenerative practices? This could be circular economy, it could be regenerative agriculture, etc. Incentive systems are extremely important, and they need to actually guide sustainability-oriented innovation. And how can we shift economic measurements towards a circular economy and regenerative agriculture? So the issue about metrics is that most people don't understand that the only reason for measurements is awareness, because if you trace it back, measurements should help us track progress and steer direction, adjust strategies. So, and most of the measurements that we do have are not really empowering and not really measurements that people can participate in. So that is a huge challenge to say, can we develop, number one, metrics different from GDP that really help us into the future, like well-being indicators and ecological indicators, etc., and put them in the forefront. But can we also develop metrics where people can participate in developing these metrics and participate in measuring? And the only thing that I have come across so far is that a number of NGOs are trying to do bottom-up measuring of progress of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's quite interesting, kind of really the participatory development of indicators for the Sustainable Development Goals. And then how do we establish governance mechanisms that are inclusive and have a multi-level, multi-stakeholder, multi-issue approach? Because we do need dialogue at many different levels, because that is what is creating collective intelligence. And how do we promote regulations and resource allocations? Remember the suggestion to make ecocide a crime against humanity. That's a typical law approach, but there are many, many law approaches that have been implemented, particularly in the environmental issues in the last 20, 50 years. But what is additional that we need that makes sure that there is a guiding regulation on behavioral change? So that comes together. The Finnish roadmap, just as a quick example, is, I don't know, are you familiar with this Finnish roadmap to the circular economy? Okay, so then I need to say, I can't say a lot because time wouldn't allow. They chose, after a consultative process, certain priorities, and I really recommend to you to look at the Finnish roadmap. It's freely available on the internet, and they have an update now. Then I also strongly recommend that you look at the previous one, from 2016, as far as I remember. And in a quite an intensive collaboration and also consultation process, they said we would like to focus on certain priorities: a sustainable food system, zero waste, as a goal, and ecological regenerative food, forest-based loops. So Finland is a forest country, but making sure that there is not a demand for more and more timber, but that the forests are really regenerative. Technical loops and technical innovation that allows a minimum use of raw material and an extended lifespan of products, a typical circular economy approach, and transport and logistics with fossil-free mobility. And then they put, interesting enough, as an additional priority, common action. So collaboration between the different stakeholders as a goal into the circular economy roadmap. And what is interesting, this was the original picture. In the new report, you don't find this picture anymore. So it's very interesting to see that the original roadmap was done by people who have a very non-linear process understanding. So an interesting picture that normally you don't find in economic, so it's a typical, really process picture, and it models natural, a natural design. I think in the new report they've changed it and made something much more linear. So we've looked at the roadmap and what they did, and in terms of when we look at equality and how far they have employed strategies for systems aliveness, it's quite interesting to say that they're really very good on the guiding regulations, on the focus and policy regulations, legislative changes to advance the guiding principles for a circular economy. And they are brilliant on innovation. They have really created an environment for innovation by companies and entrepreneurs, got them together into networks, they had learning spaces, etc. So that was very, very strong. Medium strong was that the way it had been developed, it was developed in with 1,000 stakeholders engaged, and looked at multi-stakeholder partnerships. But if you probably ask the ordinary citizen in Finland, they probably said, never heard about that. So the question is, if you want to have an entire country behind, and you want consumers to change behavior, you would probably have to do more. In terms of processes, it was also medium to say that the roadmap as such facilitated the emergence of networks that wouldn't have been there before. So that was quite interesting. I found them rather weak on measurements, because these measurements that they put weren't very empowering. They were typical GDP measurements, like employment rates, job creation. That is understandable. But the question is, if you put this all together, remember what wants to happen together, then if you're weak on measurements and you fall back into the old logic of GDP, then you might compromise the results in other areas. And I also put it red. I'm not sure if that is probably a wrong assessment, but the narratives were very competitive in terms of, we want to be the world leader, we are the smallest country, never mind, we want to bring it to the world. And that probably is a narrative that reaches certain activists in circular economy, but I don't think it mobilizes or enlivens the ordinary citizen. So there is a definite need to say, if that needs to be brought together, these different strategies on narratives and structures, innovation, metrics, governance and regulations, then these are the two areas where they probably need to invest a little bit more. So in that way, the idea is that if we look at collective stewardship, then it's really about stewarding multiple patterned approaches, and each of these approaches need to contribute to systems of aliveness. And when these different approaches come together, then the chances are much, much higher that we bring about the transformative change that we want to bring about. So if it's about large systems change, then it is really about complementary, aligned action between different stakeholders, and it is about the collective stewarding of these transformation patterns, as I call them, for a different future, and that needs to be combined with reflection and action and continuous learning. So, thanks a lot. That was it. I guess there are questions.
Yes. I wanted to thank you first for the very interesting presentation. If there are any questions, feel free to ask.
Very interesting talk, and there was a lot of things to I'm missing, I would greatly see that any master student also has to follow some philosophy courses to get a consistent value. What do you think about that?
Let me respond directly. I'm with you. I personally am very careful with the term value, although I also put here collective value in the kind of measurement of the quality of collaboration ecosystems. So that is, in that way, it's a pragmatic term, not a philosophic term. It's a pragmatic term that says, if there is not collective value for everybody in the collaboration ecosystem, then it doesn't really make sense. However, I'm fully with you. I'm slightly doubtful if people would attend such lectures.
So that's why
and that's why, as I am a pragmatist, I always say, what am I experience when people start living the value, even if they haven't attended the lecture. So, number one, I'm totally with you. I think the ethics, particularly the bachelor and master study, is quite fragmented and quite pushy. Yeah? I have a big privilege when I started university that I could free lectures. I was interested in, and I did a lot of things that were directly related to psychology and political science. However, I do think it would be interesting. There are quite a lot of both bachelor as well as master studies that have an obligatory philosophy part. So, but I always think that requires to connect the philosophy part to that particular subject, and see what are the connections, so that it doesn't become something, this is my technical innovation, and that's you should also be a good human being. Yeah, so that doesn't really help. But I would say, yes, it actually needs to be integrated. I'm fully with you. And secondly, one needs to think about what's the experiential way of studying and lecturing and having people in seminars and workshops that helps people to experience the humanity rather than teaching about it. Yeah? So, and both I think are necessary.
I think. No. Okay, you go ahead first.
Sorry. So I see you also work in South Africa, and then I worked quite a lot in South Africa, and I think the story that you told assumes quite a large role from some sort of authority to inspire this collective action. And I talk a lot to scientists, and a lot of people are not happy with choosing positions in leading that action themselves because they want to stay sort of objective, as you say, and it's very hard to force them to not be objective. And on the other hand, governments are not trusted in most of the world, maybe apart from Germany and the Netherlands, more or less. So you can't really expect governments to take initiative in most parts of the world in these kind of collective actions. So what kind of institutions do you think should lead this action? I'm sorry for long.
No, that's an important point. Who actually initiates? Who initiates some kind of collective action or collective stewardship process? And the Tunisia.
And it's easy to see how this works in Finland, I think. But really, how is this going to happen?
What is interesting in Finland that they got stuck with the government. It's a government-paid agency, Petra. That's a research agency. But then they had to kind of slow down the process because they got stuck with the new elections and the typical thing that happens in government. So, but the lesson from Finland is it needs to be an independent agency. If you really want to bring in societal change, you need to have kind of independent agencies. Although Petra is paid by the government, but it's still relatively independent. And it's quite interesting to look to understand the system and look who could be an initiating actor. In the examples that I brought in, it was a typical developmental NGO, like in Mongolia and the WWF WWF worldwide has a very strong mandate. You know, and then they can engage government and they can engage different actors. So it needs to be somebody who can, enough people can trust. You know, kind of nobody can trust everybody. It must be somebody who enough people can trust. But also look at Fridays for Future. You know, like nobody ever gave them a mandate. They acquired the mandate, and they even got them to the World Economic Forum. Whether this is a good idea or not, I doubt. But the interesting thing is that, and it's a very good example because in collective stewardship, the Fridays for Future is a self-generated movement, and they gained a mandate, and I think they have achieved a lot, although they have not yet at all achieved what they wanted to achieve. So, and at the same time, now the process continues, and Fridays for Future needs to now look at who are the alliances and what are the structures that we create in order to sustain the movement. Yeah, so, and that is similar to actors maybe, you know, if you know South Africa quite well, you know there are South Africa is an NGO country, you know, where lots of NGOs are operating for societal change because they don't trust the government or simply because it's necessary. Yes? And there's also a tradition. So I'm just saying it doesn't need to be the government, but it can, in certain circumstances, also be the government.
Yeah, but when you talk about NGOs, and particularly in South Africa, what I noticed that they're super dishonest in a way, because they always tell about the success stories. They never tell about the failures.
You only get the money for the success stories.
I know. So if they are really dependent on rich people in the West to pay them, then it always looks like a success story, but in the end, it looks like nothing's changing. So people are, that's not, I don't think that is a very sustainable way of pushing this kind of idea. So it needs to be an independent body that also can learn from its mistakes and also, you know, be very open about their mistakes. Because in South Africa, what I noticed is that people that do this, they make only mistakes, so you never hear anything from them, and that is and so they also don't learn. So that's a giant problem. Yeah.
Okay, there was.
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts. I spent a lot of time thinking about transformation as well. And in the context of my thesis, I was thinking a lot about what does it now mean as we build, like we were very good at building technical models, but then like if we want, maybe many of us can build models, but then how do we think about this process around it so that actually also through science we can create transformation, something that's then different from transition. And one thing that I came to trying to think about what is transformation is that in a way it's like that we try to translate into social reality these kind of principles that transcend just the material world. Like we're trying now to make real this consciousness that humanity is one, and that humanity, like cells of one body, is interconnected, and that we are cooperative human beings at least as well as maybe selfish beings. And this kind of underlies this transformation, and then we try to make it real with all these different people and interests, and it requires. And so then I was thinking, at least that you need to have also that conversation about those principles, which become almost spiritual. You were also sometimes mentioning esoteric or these things. And now I'm in the room, I kind of escaped, but we're like together with lawyers and environmental scientists trying to think about rules for plastic, or whether I'm in my neighborhood trying to bring transformation. I think sometimes this first step is to actually make also sometimes this commitment to these values and this conversation quite explicit. But then again, we are all in science environments in which, like, for sure, religion and even like values indeed is something that's very much sidelined. So I'm wondering, what is your experience? Like, is it helpful to indeed make kind of also these values that underlie much of what you were saying explicit and have a conversation about it, or it's more that you have to translate it into action?
I can only report my experience, and I personally, you know, some other people do it differently. I personally don't bring the value issue in because my experience is that people feel, particularly if these are managers of global companies or could also be managers of Greenpeace, doesn't really matter, people feel uncomfortable, and then there is an immediate, no, but our values are different from your values. You know, our Chinese values are different from your German values, or yeah. So it creates experience is depending where a system is. You know, sometimes you have people with whom you can immediately reflect on a different level, particularly, by the way, in South Africa. You know, in South Africa it's easy, you know, easy to go between the personal and the big issue, and you know, in Germany it's impossible. Okay? So don't talk about the issue. Yeah? So the theme, not more. Yeah? So it really, and internationally it's quite different. I've worked a lot with really international managers in responsible value chains. And the interesting thing is when you create a proper process, you like look at the farmers, this is just a local example from if you create a proper process, you help people experience and live their values. And suddenly it happens and you don't need to talk about it anymore. So this is the approach that I have just simply made in practice. Better experiences than to say at the beginning, let's agree on our common values, we all listen to each other. I'm just exaggerating. But once they've experienced how thought emerges from listening to each other and how they suddenly come up with new ideas, listening is introduced as a value. And so I think one always needs to strike a balance, you know, between bringing it in and helping people to experience it. Are we running out of time?
I think we're running out of time. Well, thank you again for being here, and thank you guys for attending. And I think if you'd like to stay a little bit longer, we have some drinks. And well, thanks again.